Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Landan with LMR.com. In this video, we're gonna be showing you how to remove the transmission, clutch, pressure plate, flywheel, and any related component for this topic from a Coyote equipped S197 Mustang with obviously a manual transmission. Before we get any further, you will need a good selection of tools to do this, as well as some good mechanical knowledge. As you progress through the video, you'll kind of see the level of expertise that's involved with doing this, as well as the amount of tools that I'm using. The guy that's gonna be turning the wrenches today is Mr. Scott Hubbard. The car we're working on is LMR's 2013 Candy Red GT. Long story short, we recently upgraded the front brakes on this car to the 6-piston SVE front brake upgrade kit, and whenever we got the car outside to burnish the brake pads, the clutch pedal fell to the floor. So with that being said, has about 148,000 miles. Figured we'd take everything apart, look it over, and replace what we need. We were able to get a few videos out of this one, including the removal stuff as you're about to see today. If you need to know how to service or replace your rear main seal, and if you need to know how to install all the components that we're removing, we'll have those videos linked for you down in the description. Also in the description will be a lengthy list of tools. Other than that, if it just so happens you own a 2015 to 2023 Mustang GT with a manual transmission, a majority of these steps will be the same for these cars, but let's think logically here. In that given time span, Ford does change some little odds and ends on every single one of these cars. So, a wrenching size may be a little bit different, or a component may just be shifted in a different location. So just keep that in mind. Other than that, let's get rolling. To begin, position the car on level ground if you're going to be working off of jack stands, or center it within the lift posts. Verify that the transmission is in neutral. Open the hood. If equipped, remove the 4 13mm nuts securing the strut tower brace. There are 2 nuts per side. Lift up on the engine cover and remove it from the intake manifold. Since we'll be working near the starter, go ahead and disconnect the negative battery cable. Now, from underneath, spray some WD-40 or a penetrating catalyst on the manifold to mid-pipe hardware. Do this for both sides. Repeat this for the sleeve hardware and the oxygen sensors as well. Loosen the 4 nuts on the exhaust sleeves with a 15mm deep socket. Loosen and remove the transmission mount nuts with a 15mm socket. Loosen and remove the 4 15mm nuts securing the K-member brace, and remove the brace. Loosen and remove the downstream oxygen sensors with a 7/8 open-end wrench, or use the specialty tool if you have one. From the engine bay, feed the tool assembly towards the manifold to mid-pipe hardware. Either use a long extension or multiple extensions with a 15mm socket on a wobble adapter. Loosen the nuts on both sides that are accessible. Now, from underneath, loosen but do not fully remove the other 2 nuts. You may have to use 2 combination wrenches for leverage. Support the mid-pipe near the exhaust sleeves. If needed, lubricate the overaxle pipes so the sleeve can slide easier. Work the sleeve towards the rear of the car and let the overaxle pipes hang in place. Fully remove the last 2 nuts from the mid-pipe to manifold, and then fully remove the mid-pipe. If you have a mid-pipe with a flex coupling, be careful not to abruptly move the joint as it can split. Loosen and remove the upstream oxygen sensor from the driver's side. Use a paint pen and mark the front and rear drive shaft where it's installed onto both flanges. On the rear drive shaft bolts, use a swiveling 10mm socket to remove the bolts. On the front drive shaft bolts, use a swiveling 12.12mm socket to remove the bolts. Lastly, loosen and remove the carrier bearing bracket bolts for the long extension and 13mm socket. You want to be careful when doing this, as the drive shaft will move towards you. Go ahead and remove the drive shaft from the car. Loosen and remove the hardware securing the inspection cover to the transmission with a 13mm socket. Use a push pin removal tool to dislodge any harness clip that is attached to the transmission and that are accessible at this time. You may also have to use a slim punch or something similar to remove the long harness clips. Disconnect any electrical connection that is accessible. Now, on the driver's side of the transmission, locate the plastic connection for the clutch line. Just in case, position a drain pan or bucket in this general area. Use a 90-degree pick to dislodge the retaining clip. Whatever you do, keep your finger over the clip as it can quickly shoot off and you're going to be trying to find it. Gently pry the clutch line away from the transmission. Have a towel ready to wipe up any fluid. Take a suitable size rubber plug and plug the line. Next, we'll want to remove the output shaft speed sensor from the transmission. That way we don't damage it when removing the transmission. On the passenger side of the transmission, loosen the T30 Torx bolt, securing the output shaft speed sensor to the transmission. Position the pan or bucket underneath the sensor. Remove the bolt, followed by the sensor, but be ready to plug the hole with a 15mm rubber or plastic plug. If you're going to be filling the transmission with fresh fluid, plugging the hole is optional. Same for the next step. If you're draining and refilling with fresh fluid, move the pan or bucket underneath the drain plug. Loosen and remove the plug with an 8mm hex socket. Allow the fluid to drain from the transmission and then reinstall the plug. Torque the plug to 26 foot-pounds and then wipe the area with brake clean and a towel. Remove the drain pan or bucket and get it out of your way. Now we need to remove the starter from the transmission. Assemble a few extensions with a swiveling 10mm socket. From the front of the starter, loosen and remove the upper bolt. Do the same for the other two bolts securing the starter to the transmission. Use a bungee cord or something similar to tie the starter out of the way. Position a transmission jack underneath the transmission. Loosen and remove the four 18mm bolts securing the transmission crossmember to the body of the car. Set the crossmember aside. Loosen and remove the 10mm bolt securing the gear shift lever to the transmission. Slide the gear selector into gear and then remove the gear shift lever bolt with a 13mm socket. Because of the location of this bolt, you may have to push up on the underside of the head while you loosen it. The shifter is now separated from the transmission. As an optional step, for some additional working room, you can remove the heat shields. These are held in place with 10mm nuts. Use a long push pin removal tool to remove the harness clip from one of the upper bolts securing the transmission to the engine. Now we can loosen and remove all the bolts securing the transmission to the engine block. A long extension or multiple shorter extensions that make up a long extension with a swiveling 13mm socket is what you need to access the upper bolts. Once these are loose, run a strap over the top of the transmission and snug it down. Use a pry bar to coax the transmission away from the engine. Pull the transmission away from the engine and then slowly lower the jack. Remove any remaining push pins holding the wiring harness to the transmission. Now you can lower the transmission away from the car and position it out of the way. If you don't have the special flywheel holding tool, reinstall one of the transmission to engine block bolts and set a large flathead screwdriver on top of the bolt. Place the end of the screwdriver into one of the teeth on the flywheel. Loosen and remove the clutch bolts in sequence instead of doing them one at a time. Leave one of the top bolts in place while you pry the pressure plate off of the dowels. Hold the pressure plate and clutch assembly with one hand while you remove the last bolt, and then the two components can be set aside. Upon further inspection of the clutch disc, we noticed one of the torsional springs had failed. While this isn't the root cause of our problem, this could have caused noise and additional damage as time went on. Also, this appears to be the original clutch, pressure plate, and flywheel, which, if you remember, this car is just shy of 150,000 miles. Remove the bolt that you use as levers to hold the flywheel. Loosen and remove the flywheel bolts with a 19mm socket. Reinstall one of the bolts into an existing location and thread it a few turns. Take two of the bolts and run them down into the two threaded holes to help remove the flywheel from the crankshaft pilot. Then you can remove the bolt holding the flywheel in place, followed by the flywheel. Assemble a pilot bearing removal tool onto a slide hammer and remove the bearing. The one on this car came out like it should. There will be an instance where the center section of the bearing is removed, but the race stays behind. If that's the case, the race can stay in place and you can drive the new center section into place. We touch base on how to do this in the video where we put all these parts back together. Go ahead and remove the crankshaft sensor ring. This is also referred to as a pulse ring or an exciter ring. Remove the separator plate from the engine block. Use a metal tool to help dislodge it if it's needed. After that, you're good to go. At this point, you're ready for reassembly of new clutch components, or you can go a step further and service the rear main seal. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, check out the description below to see the dedicated videos on servicing the rear main seal and installing a new clutch, pressure plate, flywheel, slave cylinder, and reinstalling the transmission. All right, people, so that's gonna wrap things up. As always, hope you found a ton of value in this particular video. If you did, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and turn on notifications. That way you're notified every time we release something new. And until we catch you in the next one, y'all know what to do for all things S197 Mustang. Keep it right here with the real enthusiasts, LMR.com.